way beyond their capacity to do things, to move a city forward. Now, we have a young mayor, and I'm not gonna get into who should be or who shouldn't be mayor. That's for another day.
I understand.
Everybody thought that he would change things, but his inexperience or youth has limitations no different than somebody who's been around for 60 years or 40 years. I'm saying, I'm asking you more of a specific question. If you have 9 county commissioners in Williamson County who are the good old boy network, how do you flip them out, even if the opposing party said it's time for these men and women to move on? How do you beat that incumbency entrenchment, or in your case, the good old boy network?
The only thing I can say, I have to get these people out to vote. I have to get out there on the platform. I have to go from door to door to door. I have to have town hall meetings, let people talk to me. And that's how I gathered all the other votes. People were excited. More women were excited about me than men.
Mm-hmm.
So whoever is going to run, I know I can't run in 4 years because I will be well over 70. So with that being said, I'm going to support the person, preferably as a person of color, because I want them to get their position and show that it can be changed from the good old boy system. But also we have people, let me say this too, we have people coming in from California, New York, think that we are backwards, but they want to run a position, but they don't want to run it the way that it should be run. They just want to run it to their liking. And that's what we don't want either.
Okay, and you listen to the Body Talk program on No Stop Radio Network, what type of support do you receive from the state Democratic Party?
From the Democrat, we have the Tennessee Democratic Party, which Remus Henderson is over it. He's an African-American gentleman too. He's over the whole state of Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
They give us a lot of support, a lot of training. We have training twice a year.
Okay, I'm sorry, Deborah, go ahead.
For anyone that's interested, once we have recruited to go out and support them to these positions that are open.
Okay,
And we push them to go for the training because the training will help you understand what you need to do, how you need to do it, and who do you look to help you with it, which we have developed in Williamson County, we have developed a manual on how to do things and where to do those, and who you need to reach out to.
What type, and again, you don't have to give a specific dollar amount, does the Williamson County Democratic Party receive any type of financial support from the state party?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Now, in your opinion, does money win elections, or do qualified candidates win elections? If you give money to a bad or unqualified candidate, will he or she beat the more qualified candidate?
Well, everybody asking me this question that we've been going through. Money does help, but you need a qualified candidate. For instance, in Murray County, which is my neighbor, Andy Ogus, everybody know him, he wasn't vetted, and you have to vet these people, and he was not, and it's been a disappointment to the Williamson County area.
Okay.
So you have to have a good candidate. You have to. And we put money behind the best candidate we can. Now, when I was running, we had 7 or 8 people, and they support us. I looked to, let's find the best position that we can put someone in to run and support them. We moved like 2 people at a time, not 7 to 8. So let's put all our attention on that 1 or 2 candidates and give them a lot of strong working, volunteers, money, training to get in those 3 strong positions. Let's not do 7 to 8 again.
Okay, so
Because we didn't put our attention on what was really important at the time. We was just trying to get Democrats into position. And I think if you start with 1 or 2, you could do better.
now you
And support them.
use a fancy term vet. What do you mean by vet candidates?
Well, let's look at Santos up there in DC. He was not vetted, okay?
Okay.
He was thoroughly back, research. They did thoroughly research to Andy Angles as well.
Mm-hmm.
He was a mayor, and he never went to the commission's meeting. He did nothing at all. And he's up in DC doing nothing. He does not support us at all. He's not Democrat, but he's supposed to report to Tennessee, but he's not doing it. There's a lot of other things you can read about. Read about it. He has not done one thing. It should not be up there. And we have a very strong woman that's going to run against him. And actually, she's an African American. I cannot reveal her name until after September.
Well, see, it's interesting. See, you mentioned vet candidate, and let's just say you look at his or her background, their credentials, or whatever else might exist. What's surprising, and again, I'm comparing, contrasting the two areas, Williamson County to Cuyahoga County. Quite often, the best candidate does not win here. And I think part of it, using your fancy term, most of the candidates truly aren't vetted here. Most of the candidates that win in Cuyahoga County, more so at the local level, the city level, they get elected because they're liked. I like so-and-so, or I went to school with who and who, or I dated so-and-so's sister or their 15th cousin, whatever the case might be. They don't look at their background. And see, one of the things, and I'm not saying this is tantamount to all the vetting criteria. See, one of the things what I view and study, education means nothing anymore locally.
True.
It means absolutely nothing. And it used to be, we can go as far back as, let's say, the 60s, but more so the 70s era, is education was important. Education is not important for candidates in Cuyahoga County. And, I'm not going to mention names. We've elected people, and it doesn't matter, if you have a GED or high school diploma or a PhD or anything in between, there's circumstances that dictate your position in life. And just because you have a college degree doesn't make you out to be the brightest person on the planet. But in comparison to somebody who only has a GED or maybe doesn't have anything, that person wins in this county. Now you mentioned Williamson County, where you have home values at the minimum starting at $500,000 on up. And I'm very familiar with Williamson County. It's a beautiful place to live. So is Franklin, the city of Franklin. In the city of Cleveland, I'm not gonna say it's a couple, that's just a euphemistic statement. There's not that many high-priced properties. This is a lower to middle class urban city. Cleveland's also listed as one of the poorest cities, the poorest urban city in America. So interestingly, we keep voting for people to keep us poor. Mm-hmm. Now, Williamson County, as you mentioned earlier in your description of the history, didn't start off as a $500,000 home or property value area. So, and again, I'm not trying to, demean or give full credit to, one party over the other. But certain people that did hold office saw something in Williamson County that uplifted it above to that level you mentioned earlier and I just described. So, and I like, and Deborah, you and I have a relationship, but one thing that I like that you and I have always done, we think about black people first. And I'm not trying to sound discriminatory, okay? And that's what you're saying. You need to find qualified, competent, qualified, or highly competent, very qualified black candidates. Because Mr. and Mrs. European is not gonna understand our plight. And you need that voice that is going to be able to explain that, and more so, let's sound really academic-y here. You need somebody who can articulate that And we don't have that here. You know, more recently, and it's coming to a question. See, more recently, Deborah, we had people calling our children animals, but none of the elected black folks said a damn thing. Now, nobody agrees with the behavior of the kids or teenagers. That's what's happening here in the Cleveland area. But nobody stood up when this white man called our kids animals. Yeah.
That's bad.
That's
and let me say this too. Let me tell you, I told you that Williamson County is one of the richest counties in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the African Americans were rich here. You know, they didn't show all the money, but they were rich in land, you know, and livestock. This was always been a rich. We didn't pump all our money and buy these huge houses and stuff. People were comfortable. But if you have people here that's trying to change what they read in school, you do need some black people in positions that can make a difference. Because you have white people, and let me be clear. I'm not racist. I just want every kid to know the truth about African Americans, because there's been so many tales out there running for years. But you can't have one person that don't have a dog, cat, or child in school making decisions for the school system, what book you can take out. You can't have that. And I gotta have a voice in there for them to say that. I don't have a voice to say that because I have no child in school. I have no cat and dog in school there.
Mm-hmm.
So I need a younger person, 45 years old, up to 50, to have children, to have that voice. And a professional person that understands where she or he came from. They may not come to have a PhD until they get to their 50s. They may not be adopted to work until they're 40, a MD. They may not just be a professor, they may just be a regular teacher. But I need somebody in this position, in positions in Williamson County, that's going to look after my children. I don't have it, after the children of color, to make sure that they learn what their heritage is all about.
See,
We lost that.
They're
taking books out of there. They're taking books from Williamson County too. And I can talk about this all day long because it is dear to my heart. We're not, once you erase that history, you don't have something. I mean, you can't, how are you going to talk about the war?
Well,
You can't talk about it without black folks.
this is true. You can't talk about what's known as labeled as American history without talking about black
You can't
folks.
talk about it.
Because
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. I'm just be honest with you, I need people of color. It can be Asian. It can be somebody to understand the differences that we have. And then we all keep saying we need to have a conversation. We're going to have a conversation put out the same thing.
Well, and you listen to Body Talk, the Body Talk program on the No Static Radio Network, and we have Deborah Campbell Sparks, who's the chairwoman of the Democratic Party in Tennessee and Davidson County specifically. You know, it's interesting, Deborah, you brought up public schools, education. What's, just off the, I don't want to make it sound like you're guessing, but off the top of your head, what's the graduation rate in the high schools in Davidson County? More so in Brentwood or even Franklin?
I know Davidson County is very low. Williamson County is pretty much at 100% of graduation rate.
Okay.
They have the materials for children to learn with. But that does not negate them taking away American history.
Oh, no.
Black history.
And I'm,
Yeah, but I'm just saying, and I think you asked me before about what we're rated.
mm-hmm.
We're rated as well as the Council of the State of Tennessee at that level. I did look that up when you and I talked about it. But I also found out that we had Williamson County and Davidson County had 8 schools in the 100 schools, top best schools in the country. And one of the schools, my daughter in Davidson County, she graduated from, was Hugh Hall. It's a magnet school. Martin Luther King. It's a magnet school. Williamson County, where I live, Brentwood High, Centennial High. But those are not magnet schools. Those are regular public schools.
Well, see, you mentioned in Williamson County, you basically have 100% graduation rate, and without, and I'm just gonna do this at a high level, if you have a 100% graduation rate in high school, you most likely have a 97% rate of those graduates going to college, and of that 97%, approximately 92% of those would finish college. Either some of them will leave because of financial reasons or whatever, but that's pretty good. And what we have here, I can't even compare what we have in the city of Cleveland and the public school system to what you have in Williamson County. See, the other thing, and you mentioned the American or Black history. See, one of the things, and let me bring this in Florida, and Governor DeSantis, as you know, he's just trying to make us disappear as people, period. We don't exist in any book or any paper. But one of the most significant institutions in Black community, quote unquote, across the country, the Black church, the Black pastors finally decided, they said, bingo, a light went off. We can teach Black history in our church, because the government can't cross that threshold. So maybe, and they didn't specifically say this, maybe on Wednesday when they have midweek or Bible study, depending on what they call it, it might even happen on Thursday, it might happen before service. They're going to teach Black history.
Well, so, why do we have to keep making accommodations? That's what I want to know.
Well, that's...
Why do we have to make accommodations?
Well, we shouldn't have to make accommodations.
Exactly.
And see, it'll lead to this discussion before I let you go. See, we're always given something by somebody else. When somebody else who don't look like you gives you something, they can take it away. Such as, quote unquote, affirmative action. That was given to us, and I'm not saying that some Black man and woman wasn't sitting at the table in the back of the room who was never called upon, but that was given us 50 years ago. But affirmative action, if, again, at a high level, it says, do at your best efforts. There were no percentages, no mandates in it that said for every white person you gotta hire 3 Black people or whatever. There were no percentages in it. It said, give it your best effort. And actually, the second hour of the show, we're gonna talk about diversity and all that other good stuff. But when you see, it goes back to what you said 15, 20 minutes ago. In Williamson County, you're trying to find highly competent, very well qualified Black men and women to run for office. And you also have to turn out to vote. Now, we have several issues coming up here in the state of Ohio, and we have one local issue. There's 3 that's going to be on the ballot. One is the abortion issue. Should it be legal or not legal? The other one, the marijuana or the weed, is should we have recreational weed? We won't, yeah, Deborah, that's okay. And then we have what's called PB Cleveland, Public or People's Budget Cleveland, where the local officials, more so city council, isn't listening to the residents. So a coalition of individuals got together, collected 10,495 signatures to get on the ballot to pass the People Budget Cleveland. Yeah. So.
And I said this too.
Mm-hmm.
Heidi Campbell, and she's a white lady, and she's really she ran for Congress, and she didn't win. And she made a profound statement. She said, "We don't need to keep registering people to vote. We need to get the people that's registered out to vote." That's our problem.
Well, go back to Jesse Jackson when he ran for president. If all the people his campaign registered would have come out to vote, he would have been the first Black president. But Black folks registered, but they didn't go out to vote. And, let's back up. I'm not going to mention your daughter's name. She did do an internship with me. Your daughter graduated from this fantastic magnet school, and she went to that very, very kind of, sort of college called Stanford, and graduated early. And then, she did okay, and then she got her law degree. And, you know, she's doing great things with her current law practice where she's involved now. And so are all your children. You know, I would, sometime in the immediate future, I would like for you to come back and so we can do 2 hours and talk about the dynamics, especially more so after your upcoming election and the election here. It's going to be interesting so we can contrast and compare again. We're going to see, and more so the city of Cleveland, what the turnout's going to be, especially with the 3 initiatives on the ballot: the abortion, marijuana/weed, and the People's Budget Cleveland. And you know, there's some muni judges running. I'm not saying they're not important, but let's see if the turnout exceeds the 12 to 13% threshold, especially in the Black community. And you know, for the listeners here listening to Body Talk program and No Static Radio Network, in the most recent election, we had a Black elected official come out and say he was proud of the turnout. And the turnout was in the 8 to 10% range of the registered eligible voters in the city of Cleveland. And it was much less than that in what we call the east side, the Black side of town. That's abysmal. And what most people don't recognize, especially you do, of the work that you're trying to get Black folks engaged to vote, because your vote, that vote is your voice. It represents you. The person you vote for, the initiative you vote for, you vote against, establishes your character and your integrity.
And it and give me 2 minutes. I want the people to know that I am with the Tennessee 3, which is Justin Pearson, Justin Jones, and Gloria Johnson. And I hope that you all will follow that, because that's setting a precedent for the whole country. Those 3.
Could you quickly, just for those who don't pay attention or watch the news, what's the Tennessee 3?
The Tennessee 3 are 3 individuals, 2 African American young men and an older white lady. There was a shooting here that killed 3 children and 3 adults at a private school. And they're fighting against gun control. Well, the Tennessee legislature will not bring it to a vote. And they were expunged from the galley because the Tennessee 3 were expunged because they had a bullhorn, because the House Speaker cut them off, wouldn't let them speak. So they had a bullhorn. We had a gallery full of children and parents begging them, the state representative, to vote about gun control. And they refused to. So they expunged Justin Pearson, Justin Jones. But Gloria Johnson, when she's white, and she mentioned it, the reason why she wasn't expunged because she was white. She ain't the same, but that was the truth. Mm-hmm. And she's running against Marsha Blackburn for the Tennessee. I'm sure place she went to. Okay, Justin and I call him JP, Justin Pearson, Justin Jones. Okay, they expunged him. Kamala Harris came in here. She came to Nashville, and they had a rally. These people rallied for these 2 young men because they were standing up not for themselves. They were standing up for these children that were gunned down in school trying to get education, a private white school, okay? A private white school. And the people on the Hill did not want them to want to vote on gun control. And so when they were expunged, well, Eric Holder, this attorney, you know who Eric Holder is? Mm-hmm. He's on United States Attorney General. And he wrote letters on behalf, they had to reinstate them at the time. But then they had to rerun for their position when their position's not up until, I think, 2025. And they overwhelmingly won their position back after they had to run again. But the caveat on it, they tried to do it again, the white boys up there on the Hill. And you're talking about education-wise, I have looked at most of those people that's in those positions. They have nothing but a high school education. They're part of the gun and rifle stuff up there. They get checks for that. And we had one representative, he's white, saying, well, I think live in this Tennessee, and I'm kind of embarrassed of that. And everybody knows what a lynching tree is,
Yeah.
and that's what they want to do to people instead of sending them to prison.
Yeah.
But getting back to the Tennessee Three, I get online, read about it, because it's so much I can't tell you one time. Justin Pearson's from Memphis. Justin Jones is from Nashville. Justin Jones is a Fisk University graduate, and I think Justin Pearson, he's from, I think it's Baldwin School he went to, he graduated from. So they're very intelligent, intellectual boys, not the young men. So your audience need to follow them because they're studying what's going to happen to the whole world right now.
And thank you for
This is not a joke.
Thank you for the description. You know what's interesting, Deborah, and if you look across the country, what you're seeing is that people who have the ability to discern and think for themselves, they're the dangerous ones. And there's some very bright people who didn't attend college or graduate from college, or just have high school diplomas. They have a propensity to get elected because their thought processes can be limited, and that's a general statement. I'm not saying that applies to everybody. And what happens, they become controllable. And I'm gonna make this one comment, then I'm gonna wrap it up. There was a person running here, and their statement was, "You should vote for me because I know where the bathrooms are in the Capitol."
And I know what you're saying right there, but put this in there too. Don't vote for people that grandmama and big mama voted for. Don't do that. Tell you don't do that. You vet those people on your behalf. Don't do it because grandma and big mama voted for.
And you're
Because,
correct. I said you're correct. And
you know, you got these young people that have TikTok and Twitter and Facebook. You vet those people. You question them. You write to them and ask them what they think about certain things. You make an intelligent decision. Don't let somebody else make that decision for you.
Well, one of the things that you're saying is, which is interesting, in some cases, we can't even get candidates to participate in forums and or debates here because they don't have, for lack of better terms, intellectual capacity to stand up there and represent themselves. And one thing that, I can't remember to say that, try to give attribution to anybody who did. One of the things that I will say is the person made this comment, when you cast a vote, you're actually hiring that person.
Exactly.
You're hiring him or her. So again, Deborah, I appreciate your time. We had Deborah Campbell Sparks, the chairwoman of the Democratic Party in Williamson County. And Deborah will have to reconnect and bring you back for both hours of the program. And if you can do me a favor, say hello to everybody at Meharry for me. And we're going to take a quick break. And again, thank you, Deborah Sparks. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
old. Goes back to 1620 through 564 BC. And it involves a gentleman by the name of Aesop, and everybody thinks it's spelled E. It's actually spelled with a capital A, E-S-O-P. And you might recognize some of his works by just one title, Aesop's Fables. He was a Greek storyteller, writer, and fabulist, as they called him. And he was a black man. A lot of people think that a lot of your Greek writers, such as Socrates, or thinkers, were white. Aesop was a black brother, a guy. And he wrote several books, and some of the so-called royalty would call upon him to come to their quarters, to the castle, and tell stories to them. And that's how Aesop's Fables came about. And he's the black history character or moment for today. Let's talk about diversity. And when you hear diversity, and this is going to be maybe a 4 or 5-parter over some time here. When you hear diversity, you often think of the term diversity, or the phrase, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's do a little bit of history first. For those of you who know anything, or if you're as young as I am, you'll know, you've heard of EEO, Equal Employment Opportunity. And people often put the C, that's the commission, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which I know some of you are probably gonna cringe, but some noted people who were directors of the commission, Clarence Thomas for one, and Eleanor Holmes Norton, she's the delegate from Washington, D.C. She served during the Clinton tenure. After EEO came affirmative action. And that was actually a little bit before that, but affirmative action that most of the younger listeners might be familiar with. And that was given to quote unquote minorities to help them along or gain access into certain things. But if you understand what affirmative action did or didn't do, there were no percentages in the affirmative action. It didn't say for every 5 white people, you have to hire 6 black people. For every 6 black people, you have to hire 2 white people, whatever. There were no percentages. The key phrase in the affirmative action guidelines was best effort. Give it your best effort. So from a historical basis and research basis, the first diversity legislation in this country was actually written in 1943 by Congress. 1943, not 1963, not 1983, not 1993, 1943. And it was an executive order by President Truman from Missouri, who some people, some historians have identified as a Klan member, but that's okay. Not okay, but that's okay. It's all history. You know, you can't erase history. It might take it away from us, but you can't erase it. He penned Executive Order 9981 to desegregate the armed forces. That was the first diversity initiative in this country, in the workforce in this country. It goes back to 1943, 5 years later. And one of the things that is often associated with his order was General MacArthur. No, General MacArthur refused to integrate the military. He was the Allied Supreme Commander in Asia as we were fighting the Korean War. And he was summoned to Washington. And Truman fired him. I'm willing to wager, without anybody doing that Google thing, nobody knows who followed MacArthur in the Korean theater. Nobody knows. And depending if you research and read, there was Dr. Moskow from the University, Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. He's one of the foreknown military experts of history. He said the primary purpose of the integration was really not to make black folks fight with white folks or get along. It was because as we were, quote unquote, approaching the Chinese border, we needed to amass a great force. And MacArthur declined to do that. That's why he was fired. We just had to have a show of force at the Chinese border to scare the Chinese away from coming into Korea. But of course that didn't work because they came in anyway. So let's go back, let's zoom ahead for a minute. And we have this diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's often abbreviated DEI. And I wonder, because remember I'm left-handed, so I think a little bit different. Why isn't it labeled diversity, inclusion, and equity? Shouldn't you have diversity? I should be included, and then we should have equity. But they did it diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now what's interesting, when you hear the word diversity, you have to understand kind of sort of what that means. Diversity is, it's a Greek, it's Latin, excuse me. It's a Latin term. And the prefix DI or DIS, meaning aside, to run aside, to separate. And I called and reached out to some of my diversity inclusion friends who actually run programs and asked them, isn't diversity really a nice term for division? And the person with the ultimate authority to make a decision, he or she determines the slice of the pie. Make it and put it in simple terms. If you have a sibling and your mother or grandmother or whoever bakes a cake and she hands the knife to the oldest person and she says, divide this, be diverse with your 1 or 2 or 3 siblings. The other person standing there would think, I'm going to get half of this cake or half of the pie. But the person with the knife, the person who makes the decision, determines the size of the slice. Where I have a concern here is we as African Americans, as black folks, we're always taking somebody else's program and trying to make it work for us, but we never get the knife. Mm-hmm. Most diversity directors don't determine who gets hired. Diversity directors compile statistics to say, well, we got so many women, so many black men, so many black women, so many Asians, so many this, so many that, or whatever. They don't make the hiring decisions. Mm-hmm. Now, to build upon this, when the affirmative action law was blown up, it's really not a law, but when it was blown up by the Supreme Court, after 50 years, they said, don't need it anymore, more so in the education arena. The companies on Wall Street who do calls with the Wall Street analysts, they're quarterly, and these happen monthly with certain companies, and depending on what goes on, can happen more frequently. There's been a 64% decline in discussion about diversity at these analyst calls. They don't talk about how diverse the workforce is at company A, B, C through Z anymore, because they said they don't want to be targets of being shamed that we don't have enough of this, meaning black men, black women, or whatever the case might be. Diversity. If you hold the knife, you can divide. If you look across the Fortune 50 and 500 companies in this country, take too many of us sitting in the big seat in the corner office with the big windows looking out, making all kind of crazy money. So we're not in a position to determine the slice of the pie. Now, you might say, well, but we made some gains. Oh, okay, we did. But let's talk about some facts here. Affirmative action more so benefited white women. That's a fact. The myth is it benefited blacks and other minorities. You know, you often hear that, well, if you hire a woman, you get a double hit. She's a woman and she's a minority. Well, if you hire a white woman, she's a woman and she's a minority. Black women actually, they made strides. They made better strides than black men did, in all due candor. Other myth, minorities don't receive preferences in affirmative action. Under the old affirmative action, minorities didn't receive preferences. The key was, if you were a university or even a business, you just had to have people come in and apply. And I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna date myself to the old EEO days. There used to be a sticker on the door of the companies you would go in, and it said, we practice EEO. And I, you know, being left-handed again, I said, they have an uh-oh sticker up. Why do you have to tell me what you practice, which you really don't practice? And most companies back in those days weren't really practicing that, because when you sat down for or went in for your interview, I'm gonna go back, and if you were listening to the first hour, it wasn't too many people who looked like me or you, if you're a black woman, who ever interviewed you. It was always some white person. And I remember one statement that was made to me during the interview that, well, you're overqualified for this position. Okay, I'm stick on this left-handed thing. Being left-handed, I came up with the best answer. So you want somebody who's underqualified. And it was two people in the interview, and they looked at each other, and they said, you know what, that makes good sense. Now, I still didn't get the position, but that's okay. The other thing that's strange is more so in the academic realm, and I talked to some acquaintances or people I know, and I said, well, affirmative action really didn't benefit us to get into the Ivy League schools or The Ohio State or whatever the case might be. And I asked them, I said, would you rather be accepted on merit or just be accepted on the fact that you happen to be black and there was one open seat left? And I was surprised, I won't say disappointed, I was surprised that several of them said, I'd rather be accepted based upon I'm black and I don't care if I'm qualified. Now, I had some friends who attended Harvard, and we both were majoring in the same field. And we happened to bump into each other one summer, and I had my accounting book with me. And she said, that's the book you use? I said, yes. She said, that's the same book I use here at Harvard. I said, interesting. And you know, she's a brilliant young lady. I'm not gonna take that away from her by any means. And I was a brilliant young guy. And she said, same book. And it dawned on me, I said, what you're really paying for is access to certain people. Because what's on the top of your degree does mean something. Wherever you go to college to take accounting, you're always going to be taught debit and credits. There's no other way to teach it, debit and credits. And we can go all the way up the line to cost accounting or whatever. There's debit and credits, just make it simple for our discussion. But you're paying for contacts and access. Now, when we both graduated, I finished early, took her 4 years, and that's fine. She still didn't get hired. But she had the higher access than I did. So you say, so she still faced discrimination although she was qualified to be at Harvard, than what other students in state universities or the HBCUs. And this is where we, as a diverse population, even in our own culture, have to understand something. HBCUs have a value, even if you're taking engineering or accounting. But what's important is, will the federal government, IBM or whoever, come on that campus and earnestly, honestly recruit you to come to work? Some of those companies show up just to show up. You know, again, going back to the first hour, we mentioned Meharry. Meharry's a black HBCU medical school, one of the oldest in the country. And even when I was there, we had like a 97 to 99.9% match rate on match day to some of the top residency programs in the country. And these kids, doctors, went on to do great things. It's what you make out of it. So when you go back and look at this DEI, or I'm going to change it again to make it sound more reasonable, I call it DIE. You should want to walk into a diverse environment. You should want to be included, and you want to have equity. Now, I'm going to skip ahead maybe a couple weeks here. A lot of folks get equity and equal confused. They're two separate entities. There's really no relationship. And you listen to the Body Talk program on No Static Radio Network. When you talk about equal, 2 plus 2 equals 4. You could have 2 men, 2 women, that equals 4 people. 2 rocks, 2 bubblegum balls. You got 4 items. Equity, when you talk about it in the context of being accepted or working, or even in school someplace, or even a training program, equity means I am no different than Betty, Bob, Wazlewski, or whoever, whatever last name you can think of. That's equity. We think, and I'm generalizing again, most black folks think, well, I'm equal because I work here. Excuse me, no, the hell you not. You're not. I know of a gentleman who was with a company, and they had all this diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm going to change it around. Diversity, inclusion, and equity training. Brought everybody together. You know, you did one week, and did another week, or whatever. After the training, you know, everybody had their drink, or light lunch. He goes back to work. 2 days later, they're calling him boy, calling him Bubba. One person walked up to him and said, hey, I don't want you to think I'm a racist, but I was out and I saw some black boys, men, with some hoodies on, and it was 95 degrees outside. Why do y'all do that? And, you know, the gentleman called me, and I said, well, I hope you asked him. I said, well, did he stop his car and get out and walk up to them and ask them why they got hoodies on at 95 degrees? I said, but if you listen very carefully, and it's difficult to say this, a lot of us are not accepted in certain places. We're put in certain places, environments, but we're not accepted. Or when we get there, well, you're only here because you're black. No, I'm here because I'm better than you. See, one thing that most of us try to shield ourselves from is nobody wants to be hurt. Nobody wants to get smacked in the face, punched in the stomach, or even verbally assaulted or physically assaulted. Nobody wants that. You're listening to the Body Talk radio program. And you've heard me say this before. Your experiences make you who you are. They make you who you are. And if each one of us had the same experiences, then we would all have equity, but we don't. I was in a firm, one of the big boy firms, the big three. I had a young man walk up to me in the fancy break room. And he didn't introduce himself. His first words to me, and I had seen him go by a couple times, but whatever. His first words to me were, well, we noticed that you change suits every day. And I put my coffee cup down and I said, who are you? He told me his name. I'm just gonna use his first name, Nick. I introduced myself. I said, well, you go back and tell them I can change suits for the next 45 days and not wear the same one. And I said, don't you change clothes every day? See, the thing that we have to overcome, and I'm just not saying this from an entrepreneurial sense, we have to create our own. When somebody, again, I'm gonna repeat it, when somebody hands you something, they can take it back. They gave us affirmative action, which really didn't kind of really work for us. It didn't. And if you go back and you can read for yourself, one of the biggest big boy firm, McKinsey did a report on the DIE programs. That's my new acronym for it, Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, the DIE program. Because, and I'll do candid, it ain't working. Even if you look around, and I'm addressing my sisters here, you would think if you walk into a company, I'm talking about a Fortune 500, that has female leadership, you would think the company would be loaded with females, but it's not. It's not that many black females leading Fortune 500 companies. The most recent one was Walgreens, and mysteriously there was a mutual agreement that she just walked away. Although she got Walgreens, this sister got Walgreens through the pandemic. And they were still making money, of course, healthcare driven company. And all of a sudden, I think it's been about 6 days now, they had a mutual agreement that she go home. The other thing, especially for us, people of color, and I'm not trying to be demeaning towards us as a people, we have a permanent tattoo. There's no need for us to go out and get branded at some tattoo shop. We have a permanent tattoo, because the first thing that people see is, that's a black man, that's a black woman.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
Now, we also have to understand something. They ain't gonna understand us. So therefore, I really don't have to understand them. But it's a requirement that we understand them, but they don't have to understand us. And I'm not trying to be duplicitous or use double talk when I say that. If you remember, now more so Cleveland, if you go back to the 60s and maybe 70s, Cleveland had one of the best school systems in the country. We had what I deem and other people, academics deem, as community-based education. There was elementary school or elementary schools that fed into what back then were called junior high schools. They're now middle schools, and those middle schools then fed into high schools in the community. So people you live next door with, 2 streets over, 2 streets behind you, down the street, around the corner, whatever, we all went to school together. And then somebody said mysteriously, well, we gotta bus y'all. We're gonna send the black folks to the west side, and the west siders can come to the east side. But it was one thing that nobody took into consideration. It broke up the community-based schools and made it difficult for parents to make it from the east side to the west side, to go to the PTA meetings, the parent-teacher conferences, and all that other good stuff. Other thing that nobody took and considered was that from an economic perspective, and it still kind of sort of holds true today, the west side at that time, the west siders had more stable economic an economic foundation, meaning they had good paying jobs, well paying jobs, or whatever term you want to use. So they didn't put their kids on the yellow submarines, as I call them. They sent them to the parochial schools. The Catholic enrollment in high schools just blew up. There was a waiting list to get into some of these schools, like St. Joseph, St. Edward's, Benedictine, St. Ignatius, et cetera, et cetera. And they became very picky because those schools still had entrance exams that you had to pass to get into. So maybe Bob scored 99, but Jerry scored 97. Make Jerry the black guy. Jerry couldn't get in because he had a 97. So he was banished to the public school system that was struggling. And in the primary premise of the busing was, there were 8 computers or 10 computers at John Marshall and none at the school on the east side. Well, instead of putting the kid on the yellow submarine to use the freaking computer on the west side, why don't you take half of those and give them to the school on the east side so everybody now has 5? They didn't do that. That killed the school system in Cleveland, and it's still, I wish the new CEO, I just like that title, should be superintendent. I hope this gentleman does well. I really do. Because the one thing that if you look at the poorest urban city in America, which happens to be Cleveland, Ohio, that people don't want to talk about is education in this town. The average black family cannot afford $18,000 to $25,000 to send their child to a private school. Last week I looked up what it costs to send a kid in elementary school to Hathaway Brown. We talking about $15,000 to $18,000 to go to elementary school. They have a good education, which is a good start. If you can make that sacrifice, you should consider. I'm not pushing Hathaway Brown. If the parent can do it, you do it. But now, just figure if you got 2 children, you got stair steps. They're 18 months apart, 2 years apart. That's $36,000 a year to send your child to elementary school. And then if you continue on that path, they're going to remain at Hathaway Brown or whatever, but we're using Hathaway Brown. $25,000 to send your child to high school. That's close to some state college tuitions. Now, granted, when you graduate from Hathaway Brown or Hawkins or Gilmore, or even Benedictine or St. Ignatius, St. Edwards, or wherever, your next step is somebody's college. You should never hear from a kid who's graduating from one of them schools, do you want to go to college? If that's the question, that should be the question. And that kid's, I don't know. Oh yeah, you do. You going somewhere. And I'm not knocking Tri-C. It shouldn't be Tri-C. You should be off to somebody's college somewhere because your parents made a big sacrifice to give you a jump start. So when when we talk about DIE, diversity, you should have a diverse place. It should be inclusive and it should be equitable. See, when you go for an interview and you listen to Body Talk and you go for an interview, one of the, it's a trick. They say, would you like something to drink? Say, yeah, we'd like some coffee, tea, or water. Water, coffee, whatever. Don't ever take coffee because that forces your bladder to work like crazy. But always say, well, let me go with you. Walk around that floor and look at the people who are sitting at those cubes or in those desks or whatever. Look, and you'll be surprised. You might say, oh, there's a lot of people that look like me, or there's nobody who looks like me. Now, you might be the first, and you might be the last. You might be the only. Look around. Go early. Show up a couple days, don't go in the building. Sit in the parking lot and see who comes out and gets in the Volvos, BMWs, or Mercedes, or whatever they might be driving those days. If you don't see anybody who looks like you, you could be walking into a hostile environment. You really could. You're listening to the Body Talk program on the No Static Radio Network. Now, to share a quick story with you, I'm gonna go way back. We're still talking about diversity. It was a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Davis. Became a general, his first black general in the Army. And what was interesting, he was in the same class at the esteemed West Point with Eisenhower and General Patton. And you know, for 3 damn years, they didn't talk to him. 3 years. They did not speak to him. Now, it wasn't that, you know, Benjamin Davis spoke French or Latin, nor did Eisenhower, nor did Patton. He earned his position at the Point, or the academy as they call it, but nobody would speak to him. And those 2 gentlemen are mentioned because everybody recognizes the name General Eisenhower, who became, you know, Allied Supreme Commander during World War II, and eventually the President of the United States, and General Patton, you know, probably one of the best battlefield commanders in military history, more so Army history. Nobody talked to him. And I had the opportunity to interview 2 men and actually got to know them. One was a mentor of mine, one I just knew, got to know well. They were both black. One was General Peterson, who was the commanding general at Quantico. He was the first black pilot in the Marine Corps. And the other gentleman was Admiral Johnson, 2-star guy. He became the first black base commander at Charleston Naval Base. It was interesting when they both tried to enter the military. They both had degrees. Peterson was the graduate, General Peterson was a graduate of George Washington University, and Admiral Johnson was a graduate of St. Louis University. When they both went to enter the military, they were told they weren't qualified to be officers. Now, the common thread here was, one, they were black. Other common thread, they were men. The uniqueness of this, when they both entered, they took the enlisted route, and they both were pharmacy techs. Peterson became a pharmacy mate in the Navy, and so did Admiral Johnson. Korea kicks off. Peterson then goes back, reapplies. Navy, Marine Corps short pilots, they said sure. They really didn't think he was gonna make it, sent him out to Top Gun school out in California. He's the #1 pilot. Of course, the base commander out there is like, oh, hell no, we can't have this Negro graduate #1. They take him back up for another check ride. Everybody's standing out on the runway, and the swap box is on, and the instructor is, you know, they're doing bogey chase downs, and Peterson is, you know, shooting this guy down like some balloon, and everybody's clapping. He lands, and he graduates #1, Top Gun school, etc. Admiral Johnson, he then reapplies, gets his commission. The rest is history. Makes it all the way up to a 2-star. He eventually passed away because he developed prostate cancer. That's not many before that. But the uniqueness is that was supposed to be diverse. Now, a lot of people, I'm not trying to, you know, push the military on anybody. A lot of your so-called programs or management theories and philosophies, whatever you want to call them, start in the military, and then they're spread across the country. Spread across. Anything from logistics to people management, you name it, basically came from the military. If you know anything about management technically started in Germany. You know, don't knock Adolf. He did, I'm not say some great things, he did some nice things for the German people. But the management philosophy and people management actually started modern in Germany. And it was adopted and enhanced in the US military. When we walk into companies, in some cases or organizations, a decision is already made. We gonna keep Betty for 5 years. We gonna keep Al for 3 months, and we gonna do this. Because in certain instances in a diverse environment, remember, they got the knife. So they determine who keeps climbing up the ladder or the pyramid. In actuality, it's not a ladder, it's a pyramid. That's why you don't see too many black men and women leading companies on Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at the board of directors who makes the decision of who to hire to sit in that big fancy corner office, it might be 1 or 2 black people on the board. That's just 1 or 2 votes. Majority rules. It's not the 60% rule. Majority rules. One thing that's a well-kept secret in Cleveland, greater Cleveland. I'm South Southern. Y'all ever heard of Eaton Corporation?
Mm-hmm.
There's a brother who's in charge at Eaton. He's the chairman / CEO. And I have to give credit to Sandy Cutler, who put him in place. He brought that brother from Europe right before he retired. And Sandy went into the board meeting and said, he's the person you should select. Sandy also brought an Asian woman and made her the CFO. You got 2 minorities and two of the 3 top slots running Eaton Corporation, which is an international company. And the brother at Eaton, he ain't old. He's a young guy, but he's sharp. So when you talk about, when you hear diversity, and I'm gonna go back to what I said in the 60s and 70s, there was a sticker on the door. It said EEO. That program really wasn't set up for us. Affirmative action really was not set up for us. So do you really think on the 3rd try, technically the 4th try, because we made Truman the first diversity guru in the country, who happened to be a Klansman. You think this 4th program is set up for us to succeed? It's not. So diversity, inclusion, and equity. The new initials are DIE, D-I-E. And one of the things that I share with anybody and everybody, especially if you work with me, not for me, one of the mantras that I live on and I still stand by, I will bring competent and qualified, very well qualified black men and women wherever I work. They get first dibs because Paul and Mary Wazlewski will always land. If you don't think so, I'm not trying to say he did or didn't do it. O.J. Simpson didn't land. He was exonerated, but he didn't land. Malv Alpert got caught cross-dressing in a hotel room. He got fired for 15 minutes and landed back on his feet. Black men and women don't get those opportunities. The only thing that I require, I ask of anybody that I brought to work at a firm or the college or whatever, I don't want a part of your paycheck. I don't want you to name your first, second, or last child after me. The only thing I ask, and I'm imploring that everybody out here who's a supervisor or manager who has hiring authority, bring competent, qualified black folks in to interview, and you hire them, you mentor them, you protect them. And the only thing you ask of them is if or when you make it to a similar or better position, that you can do the same, do it better than I did. If I brought in 5, you bring in 8. The next 8 better bring in 10, or whatever the case is. See, we practice and live by the crab dam syndrome. That's why we'll never get ahead. You look across this country now, separate from the HBCUs, I'm gonna do the academic institutions first. We ain't sitting in the big chair. We're not there. So therefore, that president, and he brings in the provost. He can flip the provost out. And when he's sitting there interviewing he or she as a provost, you say, well, what's your practice or philosophy on bringing back, black academics into this university? Well, I really don't believe in that. Well, then I don't believe in you. You bring in the next interview. It might take you a year or 2 years to find the right provost to bring in there. So that, because the provost, he or she appoints the deans. And then the deans appoint the program or academic directors. And I'm not saying that the Ohio State should be all black or whatever. I'm gonna use Eugene Smith as a classic example. He leads the most successful, viable, financial sports program in America. Technically, he's the most powerful black man in American athletics. And Eugene, just not personally and financially, his deputy was a black woman.
Mm.
She was black. She leads a college, athletic program now. Now Eugene's gonna have some say-so when he walks out that door at the end of academic year next year, 24. He mentored several other black folks while he was at Ohio State and put them in places or helped them get to places. I give Eugene credit for that. You know, when you look at black America, I don't care if you're looking at it from an academic standpoint, Fortune 500, or even the military. Not-for-profit, for-profit means the Fortune 500, Fortune 50 companies. If you don't see us, it's not because we're invisible, it's because we're not there. And one thing to get there, you gotta make a sacrifice. You gotta be committed, dedicated, and willing to sacrifice. The first one in the door shouldn't be the last one in the door. The first one in the door should actually stick a big broomstick under the door so it's propped open, so we can walk in and take our rightful spot. Talk to you next week. We're gonna do, we have a special guest, and this particular guest, he was raised, reared in segregated Virginia.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And he made it. He made it. When you hear him, if you sit there and you don't tear up or understand, then something's wrong with you. Thank you for listening. This is Body Talk Program, No Static Network, and I want everybody to have a great, safe rest of the week. See you next week.